Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. I am joined today by a repeat guest here on B2B Growth. I am joined by Louis Gudema. He is the President of Revenue and Associates and also the author of Bullseye Marketing. Louis, how are you doing today?
Hey, great, Logan. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it and look forward to talking with you.
All right. I am looking forward to getting the chance to interview you, Louis. I love what you're going to bring today. Some different thoughts on the inbound versus outbound debate. And you've got some very strategic things to lay out for our audience today in a common debate and a hot topic. Before we get into that, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background for anyone who hasn't heard you on this show before. I know we interviewed you probably about 300 episodes ago, so maybe about a little less than a year ago or so, but a little background on yourself and what you and the team at Revenue and Associates are up to.
Yeah, it's amazing how many that you do this every day, and it's really and have some terrific guests too. So my background is over 30 years of marketing with companies really of all sizes. So I've worked with many enterprise companies like IBM and EMC and the Boston Globe and Philips Healthcare and others. Lots of startups. I mentor startups at MIT. I have worked with nonprofits and mid-sized companies. So really companies in almost every industry. For a dozen years, I had my own marketing agency, which I had a successful exit of in 2009. Then did business development for two other agencies in sequence, not at the same time. And for the last 5 years, have been doing consulting and work directly with companies through Revenue and Associates.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So, Louis, we're going to get into this inbound versus outbound dichotomy that a lot of people are stuck in. But before we get into that, I know you referenced as we were chatting a little bit offline in some of the research that you did, took 350 plus B2B companies, primarily in the 50 to 100 employee range, and found some very interesting things as far as their evolution and their current state as far as their marketing. I would love for you to share a little bit of this background of the research, and then we'll get into the inbound, outbound typical debate.
Yeah, so it's 50 to 1,000 employees,
Right.
B2B companies with 50 to 1,000 employees, which is really the heart of the U.S. economy. If you look at the Census
Mhm.
Bureau economic data, companies of that size, there's hundreds of thousands of them, but collectively, they have more than 3 times as many employees as enterprises with 1,000 plus employees. So it's a real big chunk of the American economy. And what I did was I have this digital marketing scorecard. And I mentioned that I did business development, both for my own agency and then for a couple other agencies. And I had developed this way of seeing from the outside what were the digital marketing programs that companies were using. So even before we had conversations, I could go into that first call informed. this was more important several years ago, but did they have a mobile-friendly website? Were they active on social media? Were they using search advertising? Did they have a marketing automation program in place? Things like that. So it's a 9-point digital marketing scorecard. And I first did this study in 2014 with these 351 B2B companies. And then I repeated it this year. What I found in 2014 was a huge difference, a huge gap between the software companies, which were very aggressive users of these digital marketing programs. In fact, they were using a median of 7 of the 9 programs. There were 85 software companies in that survey group, and companies in all other industries, manufacturing, medical devices, professional services, who were using a median of just 2 of those 9 programs. And they got 1 point just for having Google Analytics on their website. I was like a really easy grader.
Very gracious. Yeah. Yeah.
And so effectively, they weren't doing digital marketing. And frankly, if you're not doing digital marketing today, you're not marketing. And so then I looked at those software companies and had this question, well, did this matter? Did this really have an impact on revenue growth? And what I found was a perfect curve. It was like such a strong correlation. The companies that scored 8 or 9 were growing roughly 5 times faster than the companies that scored 0 to 3. And, if you could see the slide, you'd see 0 to 3 real low, 4 to 5 a bit higher, 6 to 7 a bit higher, 8 to 9 the highest. So it's like a perfect curve, a very strong correlation. And this year, I redid the study with the same 351 companies. I wanted to see, had those non-software companies upped their game in the last 4 years or so?
Right.
And very little. Basically, now the median is 3 for those non-software companies. They're still in that very low 0 to 3 range. Most of that increase is simply because companies usually redo their website every 4 years or so. And so in the interim, many of those companies did. And now, whereas 4 years ago, only about 20% had responsive websites, now like 80% do. And so that ticked the median up a point. But there's no real increase in integrated omni-channel marketing programs like you would see from many software companies or, some large B2C companies or so forth. And this, frankly, Logan, this was just a real shock to me because I just assumed everybody knew about these modern marketing tools and were using them. And I came to realize that, in fact, the vast majority of the business world, which could really benefit from them, this B2B world, simply was not aware of or using them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. There was only a marginal increase, and like you said, you're kind of just catching people that happen to do a website redesign. So that kind of pushed the needle a little bit, and even at that, didn't see a whole lot of movement. So for folks that have been looking at digital marketing in this dichotomy over the last 10 years or so of inbound versus outbound. As we were talking a little bit offline, Louis, you mentioned that there's really an issue with this debate. Tell us a little bit about how you see this differently. You've got people screaming on one side that outbound's not dead, other people that are huge proponents of inbound. And I think you have a little bit of a different voice to bring to this debate.
Yeah. So, the whole inbound marketing approach was really kind of laid out in 2006. It's kind of grew out of the whole idea of permission marketing. And the idea of inbound marketing is that you put out really useful or entertaining content, you attract people to your website, you get them to sign up for your emails and give you permission to market to them. You invite them to webinars and so forth and nurture them until they're ready for a serious conversation about buying your product. And social media is useful in both, publicizing, distributing that content, and in amplifying it. But first of all, the world is utterly different from 2006. If anyone told you outside of the inbound world, if anyone said, hey, we're marketing like we were in 2006, you'd wonder
Mhm.
what they were doing, because the world has changed so much. In 2006, just a few examples, Facebook had 12 million members, and they were just opening themselves up to non-students.
Mhm.
Uh, Steve Jobs was rehearsing a presentation for the January 2007 introduction of a new product called the iPhone. Instagram was 4 years off. It was just
Mhm.
the today the internet has 6 times as many top level domains as 12 years ago. It has tens of billions of more web pages, and Google has dramatically changed its whole search algorithm over those
Mhm.
dozen years
Yep. Many
with
times.
yeah.
Yep.
And so the problem you have now on the content side is that it's extremely difficult for companies to get even first page search results for content, let alone one of those top 3 positions that drive the majority of clicks. Ahrefs, the SEO company, did a study last year where they found that only 1 in 20 pieces of new content even gets to page 1 of Google's search results in the first year. And that's usually a company that already has a high domain authority. So if you're trying to, if you're not one of those few industry leaders that already has those top positions, and you're putting out new content, the odds that it's going to get a very high ranking and drive very much traffic to your site is very, very low. And at the same time, the opportunity around social media for brands, for organic social media, really peaked around 2013, because around that time, if you were a brand and you posted to Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, 10, 15, even 20% of your followers would see your post. Well, in 2013, those platforms started to throttle that exposure back dramatically. And this wasn't a secret. A lot of social media, experts were talking about it at the time. And today, if a brand has an organic post onto one of their platforms, less than 2% of their followers, 1 in 50, is likely to even see that post. And engagement rates are like 0.1% of followers.
Mhm.
So, that whole idea of how to, and this is part of what Bullseye Marketing grew out of, is I saw these programs that were being promulgated as like the way to do it, that just weren't moving the needle at all.
Mhm. So the inbound outbound debate, what I hear you saying, Louis, is some of that is somewhat dated. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about it as if it's still 2006 when the inbound category really kind of came to be. And your way of thinking about it is really framing it differently, framing your marketing in this 3-phase approach that you call bullseye marketing. Tell us a little bit about how that differs from either, a strictly inbound or strictly outbound. Let's start with phase 1. You mentioned fully exploiting your existing marketing assets. What's the start there as you make this shift to a different framework?
Yeah, so just throw out the whole inbound outbound thinking, and just don't think about that at all. And so in phase 1, where you take advantage of your existing marketing assets, if a company has been around for even a few years, it has all sorts of marketing assets that, like I mentioned from my survey, most companies are not taking advantage of. Let me give you an example of 3 or 4 of those. So, for example, the customers, it all starts, the customer has to be at the center of everything, and customer knowledge and understanding. And most companies don't spend enough time just literally talking to their customers, listening to them, finding out what they really need, and from that, building a superior customer experience. And so, for example, Forrester every year does a survey of over 100,000 consumers. And the Temkin Group, which is a customer experience group, does a similar survey. And they're both looking at how do people rate the customer experience or net promoter score of these major brands. And for the last 3+ years, that's either been flat or declining. And so companies, even these larger SMBs that I surveyed, these weren't solopreneurs or five-person companies. These were companies with dozens or hundreds of employees. But any company can really create a competitive advantage for itself by listening to customers, understanding what their real needs are, and creating a superior customer experience. And yet, both on the listening side, and I've done those interviews for customers, and the
Mhm.
results are always a shock to the CEOs who thought they knew their customers. And then taking that and really creating a superior customer experience, those are real competitive opportunities. Another marketing asset that companies have that they don't take advantage of is their websites. One of the things that I found in my survey was that three-quarters of those larger B2B SMBs had no prominent calls to action or conversion opportunity devices on their websites.
Mhm.
And so while people in the tech world may be used to having chatbots and Drift on their website and are talking all the time about the great response that those tools have, or exit intent pop-ups, or any number of other
Mhm.
devices, the vast majority of companies out there are not using these tools at all.
Right. They're not even ready for the forms versus chat debate.
Yeah, that's not a debate.
Right.
They have neither.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
And just one more example is email marketing. Email is the 800-pound gorilla of digital marketing and bullseye marketing. And McKinsey estimates that it's 40 times more effective than social media. And yet, all the time when I start to work with a company and I ask them how many email addresses do they have, aside from the fact that their if they have a CRM even, and some of these are companies that have been around for decades, may not, but they can have tens of thousands of email addresses. But you ask, how often do you send out emails? And they'll say, oh, at the holidays. And
Yeah.
yet and it costs almost nothing
Mhm.
to send emails to 10,000 people as often as you want to with a platform like MailChimp or Constant Contact. Costs less than $100 a month.
Mhm.
And yet most companies don't take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So phase two you talked about, Louis, is sell to people who want to buy now. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Sure. So in phase two, you're really using intent data. And intent data and the whole idea of intent, I don't think that was hardly being talked about 12 years ago or
Mhm.
even 5 or 6 years ago. This world advances so rapidly. But for example, most companies, our markets are actually much smaller than we think they are, because while we may have a certain size of potential customer base, especially for B2B, most of those companies are not in market to buy what we're selling anytime soon.
Right.
So, and if you're marketing to that entire universe, it's very inefficient and it's not going to be very effective. But if you can really focus your marketing in on those companies or those consumers who plan to buy in the next few months instead of maybe sometime a few years from now, you can have much more cost effective and efficient
Mhm.
marketing.
Yep.
And so, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the intent data sure has come a long way. We've recently started using Crunchbase, a tool that a lot of folks are used to in doing research on their prospective clients, layering in tools like Bombora and layering in that intent data really has been a game changer in how you can set your marketing priorities for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Bombora, the Big Willow, Tech
Mhm.
Target, Aberdeen. You've got all sorts of companies selling B2B intent data. Kroger and Amazon on the B2C side have intent data. Facebook, and Google are offering intent data as part of their platforms. And so, one of the things we did at my agency, in addition to working with some very large enterprises, we then developed a practice, a specialty in developing websites for small colleges and private schools. And we had our own content management system. And we had a database of 3,000 schools. But after a year or two, we knew when that school had last done their website. And we wouldn't call them, because teleprospecting was actually very effective for us, we wouldn't call them for 3 years because we knew that if they had done their website last year, they weren't going to do it again this year.
Right.
And so, using Google AdWords is a way, that can be a form of intent data. Using tools that show you surges of visits to your websites from people at particular companies, who suddenly you're seeing 3 or 4 people from the same company looking at things and opening emails and signing up for webinars, and they weren't doing that last month. Or as you mentioned, companies like Bombora. These are all ways to really focus your marketing and make it much more efficient.
Mm-hmm. So then moving from there, Louis, you mentioned phase 3 to wrap up this framework in Bullseye Marketing is to cast a wider net. Tell us a little bit about how you kind of round out the framework there with phase 3.
Sure. So, as I talk about in my book, phase 3 this is frankly where content marketing lives, because content marketing tends to produce results over the course of 2 or 3 years. The same thing with organic social media or display advertising. These are really branding programs, they're really awareness programs, and they don't tend to produce results very quickly. Unfortunately, many people who aren't familiar with marketing really almost define marketing as those programs. If you ask someone, what is marketing? They're very likely to say, social media, advertising. And yet those are the slowest and least efficient ways to generate new leads and revenue for a company. And frankly, if one of those non-software B2B companies that I studied wanted to get into marketing and started there with those outer ring programs, they'd be very likely after 6 or 8 months to say, well, we're not seeing anything. We knew it. Marketing doesn't work for us. But if they started in the center of the bullseye, and which is not just the lowest risk, least expensive, fastest acting programs, but those center of the bullseye programs really set the foundation for success with the second ring and the third ring of the bullseye. It's really an on-ramp for these companies that haven't been doing much marketing but could benefit so much from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you make a good point there of, companies taking one piece of the pie and then saying that marketing doesn't work for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Louis, this has been a great conversation. I always love to hear a fresh perspective on a hot topic, and I feel like you've done that with a different approach to the inbound outbound dichotomy. If anyone listening to this would like to ask any follow-up questions on the research you've done, find the book, or reach out to you, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, the book's available on Amazon in both paperback, which I love the paperback version, frankly, and as a Kindle or an ebook. You can contact me at Louis, Louis, at revenueassociates.biz. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Louis Gudema. And, I speak regularly to groups. Would love to talk with anyone who's interested in having a speaker at their conference or their business group, because I do that all the time. And would be happy to answer more questions from people through any of those channels.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show again.
Thank you very much, Logan.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.